Ann Flynn Ware from Home Accents today. Welcome to the Las Vegas market. Joining us today is Michelle Lamb, Editorial Director of the Trend Curve, which is a trend forecasting company for the home furnishings and accents industry. Welcome. Thank you for making the time to stop by.
It's always fun to do it.
I understood you just got back from Maison in Paris, and one of the things that you saw that was beige coming back. And so we're wondering, is that like people cocooning? What is bringing that color back to the forefront?
Well, what's bringing that lack of color, you might say, to the forefront? You know, and it kind of reminded me of, was it the 1980s when everything was layered off-whites, differentiated only by texture? I wonder if we'll go back to that again. But for right now, there's a lot of beige out there. Not always beige alone. Certainly there's plenty of beige alone, but sometimes with a little bit of another neutralized hue. So it might be, for example, terracotta. It could be something that's a darker brown than beige. Maybe it's a mocha sort of color, but mostly it's off-white.
Interesting. You mentioned the 80s. We've seen a lot of returns to things from the 70s. Do you think we're kind of moving into more of an 80s look, kind of evolving?
You know, one of the reasons why I'm thinking about the 80s right now is the return to tradition, not tradition as we've known it before, but some sort of modernized version of tradition, mostly by young adults. So let's say the younger edge of millennials and then Gen Y also. They're looking for tradition. They're doing traditional things like having dinner parties again. And so if you think about that as part of the 80s, when we had a lot of tradition going on, it seems like there could be a string between the two.
Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting because supposedly boomers are parents of millennials, and then Gen X is parents of Gen Z. So maybe, I was in the 80s, and so my kids are trying to get back to tradition. So I find that very interesting.
Well, I certainly saw some clues about that when I was in Paris at Maison Objet, but even here at this market, a company called Mina Victory, which I'm sure you know, they have 40-year-old needlepoint and pettipoint panels that they are using in new ways. They're putting together in pillows that are much more simplified than we would have seen back in the 1980s. So there's no gimp, there are very few tassels, but there are tassels.
One of the other things that you mentioned noticing is that black has kind of fallen off the cliff. Why do you think that's happening?
I think it's happening for a couple of reasons. One is there's always a fatigue factor with something. When any color gets to be too important, any neutral gets to be too important, at some point it's the peak of what the market can tolerate, and it just goes in the other direction. But I think there's something else too, and it's the ascendance of brown. So think about how browns have really picked up over the last few years to the point where you can consider them mainstream right now. You might not think of it this way, but beige is nothing more than a light value brown. That's all it is. And now there's so much brown, it doesn't leave much room for black. So we'll certainly see black, but we'll see a little line, an accent, maybe a collection, but certainly nothing like what we have seen in the last few years when not only black, but matte black was one of the biggest trends out there.
Some of the other things you look at is what you're going to see more of and what you're going to see less of in the next coming quarter. Are there any things that stick out to you that you think we'll see more of or less of?
I think wood. And I think predominantly, reaching back to that idea of brown ascending right now, we'll see more brown wood. Probably more brown wood than we've seen since the 80s. Maybe so. So that's one thing. And also in terms of materials, terracotta, it just makes sense because we're looking at the terracotta colors, all of those variations of darker and, dare I say it, browner oranges altogether. And so that brings terracotta back for us too. I also think that glass is having a moment. There's so much happening with very thin, very delicate glass, borosilicate glass, little hidden creatures at the bottom of a bowl or a cup or something like that. It's a lot of fun.
The colored glass too, walking around market, I've seen so much, and it is fun. It adds that little bit of color, Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you stopping by.
I
We'll
enjoyed
check
it.
with you after market, see what what your new thoughts are. I hope everyone has a great market. Thank you.